You're hiking through the woods. Suddenly, birds scatter out of the branches. A deer locks eyes with you, pupils blown wide like saucers, then takes off like it just remembered somewhere urgent it needs to be. A squirrel does that classic move, sprinting a few feet, freezing, sprinting again. Basically having a complete meltdown simply because you're standing there in your boots, munching on a granola bar. So what's the actual deal here? Why are creatures armed with claws, venom, antlers, blazing speed, and in some cases the power to literally drop their own tail? Why are these animals petrified of us? Of squishy, sluggish, mostly bald primates who lose their breath climbing a couple flights of stairs? The explanation runs far deeper than most people realize. And once you get it, you'll never view a panicking squirrel the same way again. Let's go back to where it all began. Here's something that might sit a little uneasily with you. This fear animals carry toward humans isn't a recent development. It didn't begin with firearms farming or even the discovery of fire. It goes back millions of years. Scientists actually have a name for this phenomenon, the landscape of fear. The concept is that prey species don't simply react when a predator shows up in front of them. Their whole existence gets organized around the chance that a predator might be lurking nearby. Where they eat, where they bed down, where they go for water, what time they choose to move, every bit of it gets shaped by avoiding death. And for an enormous stretch of time, our early ancestors were a major piece of that equation. Early humans hunted constantly. Paleolithic people were what's known as persistence hunters, meaning speed wasn't really our advantage, but we had something even scarier. We could simply keep moving for hours under the blazing sun until the animal dropped from sheer fatigue. If you were a gazelle and spotted some strange two-legged figure jogging steadily in the distance, that sight alone was nightmare fuel. So animals adapted, not as individuals, but as entire bloodlines. Those that fled at the mere outline of a human survived to breed. Those that didn't became dinner. Run that cycle for thousands of generations, and you end up with animals carrying human fear written straight into their genetic code. It isn't something they pick up through experience. It's a built-in survival mechanism, the apex predator theory. Now here's where things get truly fascinating and honestly a bit ego-boosting. Back in 2016, researchers from the University of Western Ontario published findings that made a pretty bold claim. They proposed that humans qualify as a, quote, super predator, meaning other predators fear us more than they fear each other. Their method was to play audio for wild animals, but not sounds of other predators like roaring lions or howling wolves, just ordinary human voices, the kind of mundane chatter you'd overhear waiting for a bus. The outcome was striking. Mountain lions ran off at over double the rate compared to when they heard other predator sounds. Bobcats, deer, skunks, opossums, every one of them fled harder and faster from human chatter than from any other recorded threat. Even predators that have essentially no natural enemies reacted with that same panicked flight response to human voices. Sit with that for a second. A mountain lion, a top-tier predator capable of taking down deer for a snack, fleeing because it heard someone discussing their weekend plans. Why does this happen? Because even the apex of the food chain carries generational memory that humans equal danger. We've hunted them too. We've shoved them out of their territory. We've killed them whenever they got too close to our livestock. Eventually, even creatures sitting at the very top learn that human presence means trouble. We don't just frighten animals because we're predators. We frighten them because we're unpredictable predators. And in the animal kingdom, unpredictability might be the single scariest trait there is. The problem with being unpredictable. Let's dig into why that unpredictability matters so much. Most predators stick to routines. Wolves hunt around dawn and dusk. Crocodiles wait in ambush near the water's edge. Hawks pick off small rodents in open terrain. Prey species have spent millions of years learning to decode these patterns, and recognizing the pattern is literally what keeps them alive. A deer that knows the typical wolf hunting grounds can simply steer clear. A fish that knows when herons feed can stay in deeper water during those windows. But humans? We hunt at sunrise, we hunt at midnight, we hunt solo, we hunt in packs, we use fire snares, spears, bows, rifles, even drones now. We hunt on land, underwater, from the sky. We go after animals we plan to eat and animals we have no intention of eating. We target dangerous creatures and harmless ones alike. From an animal's point of view, we don't follow any pattern whatsoever. We're a variable they simply can't crack. And when something can't be solved, the only logical move left is to avoid it completely, all the time. There's a term in behavioral ecology called predator recognition that explains how prey species sort threats into categories. Most predators fit neatly into recognizable boxes. Big cat, raptor, canine, and animals develop specific responses tailored to each type. Humans, though, don't slot into any of those boxes cleanly. Our scent is strange. Our movement is strange. The sounds we make are strange. And then occasionally we'll spend 20 minutes tossing crumbs to pigeons in a park. We don't fit the system. And to an animal's brain, that's deeply, deeply disturbing. So what about animals that clearly aren't afraid of us at all? Fair point, because you've absolutely seen pigeons downtown that would sooner get run over than step out of your path. You've watched raccoons stare directly at you while rummaging through your trash without a hint of concern. Seagulls that'll snatch a fry right out of your fingers while holding eye contact the whole time just to prove a point. So what's happening there? That's called habituation, and it's a key concept in animal behavior. When creatures get exposed to something repeatedly, humans in this case, and nothing bad ever comes of it, their fear response gradually fades. Essentially, the brain concludes, this thing keeps appearing, and nothing harmful happens, so I'm burning energy for nothing by staying scared, and it lowers the threat rating accordingly. Urban wildlife goes through this shift across generations. City pigeons have coexisted with humans for so long that the instinct to flee has basically been bred out. There's zero survival benefit to bolting from people who toss you breadcrumbs daily. The same goes for crows, and that brings us to a particularly fascinating case. Crows don't just lose their fear of us, they actually learn to recognize individual human faces. Research has shown crows remember specific people who've mistreated them and will hold a grudge for years, harassing those individuals whenever they cross paths. They even recruit other crows to join the campaign. They teach their offspring which humans to avoid. So not only have crows shed their fear, they've built an entire culture around keeping tabs on us. They're quietly taking notes, which is either pretty impressive or genuinely alarming depending on how recently you've ticked one off. The island experiment that changed everything. Here's one of the most striking pieces of evidence for why humans inspire fear in animals, and it comes from a kind of natural experiment found on islands, in oceans, and in regions where people have either never set foot or have been absent for long stretches. In those places, animals show barely any fear response at all. The Galapagos Islands are the textbook example. When Darwin landed there in the 1830s, he was stunned. The wildlife simply wouldn't budge. He documented sitting beside birds that refused to fly off, and even shoving iguanas into the water only to watch them swim right back and casually settle beside him again. Marine iguanas, blue-footed boobies, giant tortoises, none of them fled. None of them seemed bothered. The same pattern shows up across parts of Antarctica, where penguins display virtually no fear toward people. They'll waddle straight up to researchers, poke around their gear, and occasionally try to make off with something. Scientists in the field actually have to shoo away curious penguins fascinated by cameras and backpacks. And in marine sanctuaries where fishing has been outlawed for decades, fish populations gradually lose their wariness of divers. Researchers have recorded fish in protected waters actively swimming toward people, while fish just outside those zones dart away. The takeaway here is pretty blunt. Fear of humans isn't a default setting baked into nature. It gets installed through lived experience. The moment humans stop being a threat, whether because they were never around or because hunting simply stopped, that fear fades, sometimes within only a handful of generations, which tells us the fear isn't really about us as a species. It's about our behavior, the landscape of fear and its ripple effect on ecosystems. This is where things get really compelling, because this fear isn't just some odd quirk of animal psychology, it actually reshapes entire ecosystems. Researchers studying wolves in Yellowstone made a surprising discovery. After wolves were brought back into the park in 1995, the deer population didn't just shrink, their behavior shifted entirely. Deer stopped grazing in wide-open valleys. They steered clear of riverbanks. They moved in different patterns and spent far less time in exposed terrain. And because the deer stopped overgrazing those areas, plant life rebounded. Rivers shifted course as erosion along the banks slowed. Trees grew back, birds returned. Fish populations bounced back because the streams became healthier overall. All of that happened simply because wolves made deer afraid. The fear itself, not even direct predation, was the force driving ecosystem-wide transformation. Ecologists call this the landscape of fear, and it ranks among the most powerful invisible forces shaping nature. Now apply that same logic to humans. When people show up in an area, whether as hunters or just as a steady presence, that same fear effect takes hold. Wildlife shifts its routines. They steer clear of certain zones at certain times. Feeding habits change. Nocturnal activity ramps up since darkness offers cover. Species that were once active during daylight switch to nighttime to avoid overlapping with us. A 2018 study published in Science found that wildlife across 6 continents had grown noticeably more nocturnal in direct response to human activity. Mammals that once roamed during the day were shifting to night hours, not because their habitat had been destroyed, but purely because humans were in the vicinity. Just our presence alone was enough to reset the daily clocks of wildlife across the globe. We're not merely predators, we're a worldwide ecological force, literally rewriting when animals choose to be active. Let's talk about the smell factor. Okay, here's something nobody's eager to hear. Part of why animals fear us might simply come down to how disgusting we smell to them. Human scent acts as a remarkably potent chemical signal out in the wild. We're covered in a mixture of synthetic substances, deodorant, soap, laundry detergent, food residue, plastics, exhaust fumes, and various other things we'd rather not dwell on, all of which is completely foreign to the natural world. And even setting all that aside and focusing purely on natural human body odor, the signal remains strong and unmistakable. Predator urine is frequently used to scare off wildlife in management practices because animals treat scent as a top-tier danger cue. Studies show human scent triggers a nearly identical reaction. When researchers placed strips soaked in human sweat near wildlife cameras, animal activity dropped by roughly the same amount as when strips soaked in mountain lion urine were used. Let that settle in for a moment. Simply existing and emitting the natural smell of being alive makes you roughly as terrifying to local wildlife as an actual mountain lion. Some of you have clearly known this already and turned it into a personality trait. Fair enough. So why do some animals attack instead of fleeing? Reasonable question. If animals are this terrified of us, why do some still attack? The answer is almost always identical. It's not aggression driving them, it's desperation. Nearly every dangerous wildlife encounter falls into one of three categories. First, the animal feels trapped with no way out. Second, it's a mother defending her young. Third, the animal has been forced into close contact with humans due to habitat loss and is already under intense stress. In nearly every situation, attacking is the last available option, not predatory behavior but pure defense. Bears illustrate this well. By nature, bears go to great lengths to avoid humans. Given any reasonable chance, a bear will simply walk away. The trouble is that as human development keeps creeping into bear territory, their room to retreat keeps shrinking. Bears end up with fewer choices, scarcer food, and more unavoidable contact with people. And when an already overwhelmed animal with nowhere to flee gets startled up close, it responds the same way any creature, humans included, would, by going on the offensive. There are real exceptions, though. Polar bears stand out as one of the few large predators that will actively pursue humans as prey. But that becomes less shocking once you realize polar bears evolved in a world with virtually no large predators besides themselves, limited prey options, and absolutely nothing around to teach them to fear upright, two-legged creatures. They simply never got the warning. What happens when an animal has truly never encountered a human? The clearest evidence for all of this shows up in first contact scenarios, moments when explorers or researchers run into animals with zero prior exposure to people. The outcome is always the same: no fear whatsoever. Historical accounts from Pacific voyages describe sailors casually walking up to birds that had never laid eyes on a human and simply picking them up. Early descriptions of the dodo, now famously extinct largely because of this very trait, depict a bird so completely unbothered by humans that hunting it took almost no effort at all. They'd actually approach the hunters. Sailors assumed they were just dumb birds. They weren't. They'd simply never been taught to be afraid. The same pattern shows up in present day too. When researchers visit remote populations, certain isolated insect species, or deep-sea creatures hauled up for the first time, that fear response is barely there or absent entirely. This gives us a glimpse into what the world once looked like before we became such an overwhelming presence in it. Not a world free of danger, but one where danger didn't walk on two legs and didn't seem to come from every direction at once. The evolutionary arms race. Here's the uncomfortable conclusion you arrive at if you push this line of thinking far enough. The fear animals hold toward us isn't some glitch. It's accurate. It's a precise read of reality. Humans have driven hundreds of species to extinction. We've collapsed populations through overhunting. We've reshaped or wiped out more than half the planet's natural habitats. We've altered the global climate itself. Statistically speaking, the animals that fear us are making the correct call. But here's the catch. Because of that fear, because animals flee, hide, and steer clear of us, we often miss the true scale of our own impact. Wildlife essentially vanishes from view. We walk into nature and see less and less of it, and we mistake that absence for things being fine. Empty landscapes read to us as peaceful rather than as evidence of flight. The fear itself makes it easier for us to overlook what we're actually doing. And the cruelest twist in all of this is that the landscape of fear works against conservation efforts too. Animals deeply afraid of humans become harder to study, harder to protect, harder to assist in any way. Fear acts as a barrier that locks researchers out and keeps wildlife from receiving the protection people are trying to offer. The populations suffering the most trauma also end up being the hardest to reach. The fragile thread of habituation and why it matters. But let's wrap up on a slightly more hopeful note, because this is genuinely one of the more exciting areas in wildlife science right now. Researchers keep discovering that under the right circumstances, steady, non-threatening human presence, reliable food sources, less hunting pressure, animals are capable of rebuilding trust toward humans in surprisingly short periods of time. Mountain gorilla tourism initiatives in Rwanda and Uganda have tracked gorilla troops that went from bolting at the sight of rangers to eventually tolerating, and in certain cases seeming to genuinely enjoy, the presence of human observers, all within just a few years of patient, respectful habituation efforts. It's not that the gorillas forgot fear was ever necessary. It's that they were given enough consistent evidence to revise their understanding. These particular humans, in this particular setting, reliable, harmless, with no bad outcomes attached. Fear is learned, and learning is reversible in both directions. Rewilded regions, areas where human hunting and disturbance have been pulled back, show wildlife slowly regaining their natural patterns of behavior. Daytime grazing comes back. Open spaces get used again. The tense, constantly alert behavior typical of heavily hunted populations begins to loosen up. The landscape of fear isn't a fixed, unchangeable thing. It just takes humans proving, reliably and repeatedly, that we're not a threat. And given our history, that's no small task. Animals fear us because we spent millions of years earning every bit of that fear. We are the most adaptable, relentless, unpredictable, and ecologically dominant predator this planet has ever seen. We hunt on every continent, in every climate, at every hour of the day. We don't fit into any pattern an animal brain knows how to interpret. We've pushed species into extinction on every landmass we've ever stepped foot on. Just our presence alone reshapes ecosystems. That squirrel having a meltdown on your lawn isn't overreacting. It's running a survival program refined over hundreds of thousands of years. It genuinely has no idea you're simply trying to enjoy a granola bar and take in some fresh air. But here's the silver lining. The same intelligence that made us so terrifying, our creativity, adaptability, sheer capability, is also exactly what gives us the power to choose a different path. Animals living in places where humans have proven reliably safe don't run. They don't hide. They go about their lives out in the open, under the daylight, without burning all their energy on constant vigilance. That version of the world already exists. It exists in scattered pockets, reserves, and islands where the experiment has had time to play out. The landscape of fear isn't permanent. It's simply a mirror of our behavior. And behavior can change. The real question is whether we're willing to become the kind of species worth not fearing.